Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and welcome to another episode of the weekly reset, Taliesin and Evitel's Wondrous Wisdom Show. In a week where we were going to talk all about patch 10.2 at last, and season 3 and raid ending cinematics, which are really popular, like everyone loves them, and that's nice, isn't it? Because it's always lovely when we're all happy. And you know what? We still are going to talk about all of that, but only after we talk about the only headline that really matters to any of us right now, the announcement of patch 10.2.5, the existence of which is a surprise to nobody, and everything that's in it, which is a surprise to everybody. Because if you were expecting Dragonflight to wind down after those really very good epilogue quests, I didn't say cinematics, I said epilogue quests. Stop writing that tweet that says I said cinematics. You stop that right now. Then frankly, you forgot how this expansion's favorite thing to do after world events is to surprise us with content which is basically way more than we were hoping for. And that is absolutely what Seeds of Renewal looks like it's going to do. A little TLDR before we get into the details on this, but basically, we have some very compelling reasons to believe that this is nothing. There is something way bigger coming soon, and I think I know what it is, and we're going to talk about it later on. For now, let's just go down this list in order. Dragonriding unlocks worldwide. Currently, as this stands on the PTR, this is specifically Dragonriding, as opposed to dynamic flying in general, as in, this is only available on your Dragon Isles Dragonriding mounts. None of the other hundreds of old mount types that we know Blizz are working on converting are enabled. There's no toggle. If you summon your new Proto-Drake in Elwyn Forest, you'll be Dragon Riding. If you summon your, Sandstone Drake, you're going to be old school swim flying. Also, that Dragon Riding mount is only going to be flying at 80% of the speed that it does on the Dragon Isles, which probably makes you go, I know it made me go, but 80% of 3 times faster is, well, it's still over twice as fast as traditional flying, okay? I got from Booty Bay to the most northerly point in Eastern Kingdoms that they let you get before those pesky Blood Elves ruin everything in minutes. And personal experience only, obviously, but it never felt slower than in the Dragon Isles. Because let's be real, those zones are tiny in comparison. And with all the swooping and rolling, honestly, if I hadn't seen the debuff, I don't think I'd ever have noticed. It feels really good. But maybe even better than that, though, especially if you're an evoker, kind of only if you're an evoker really, Drakthir racial ability Soar is now basically Dragon Riding 2, just like it always should have been. You are now your own Dragon Riding mount, Scalies, with all the upgrades and abilities that entails. So you're just flying everywhere, which is awesome, with a 10-second cooldown on the abilities starting from when you land, which is weird. I don't know why that's there. If you know why, let us know in the comments below, because it's not actually a big deal, but it is oddly arbitrary feeling. Like, oh, better make it just a tiny bit worse than actual Dragon Riding, which, yeah, mission accomplished, but why? Why do that? But this Dragon Riding stuff, great news, and surprising news for many of us perhaps. I think this first step into the dynamic flying on every mount toggleable future has arrived sooner than I thought for sure, but overall this probably is the level of feature that I was expecting from 10.25, unlike the retaking of Gilneas. And this isn't even the best thing about the patch, honestly, it's wild. Yes, that's right fam, it is time to dig up that BlizzCon bingo card and give ourselves a retroactive +1. Even though it wasn't announced at BlizzCon, and that was kind of the whole point about the BlizzCon bingo card. We're going to join Gen, we're going to go to Gilneas, we're going to take it back, and it has been confirmed that these quests will not be tested on the PTR, and finally going to sort out the vague limbo, no one can even say with 100% certainty what the canon situation is there shit show is a huge dub, and obviously fits with the theme of renewal and hope and fresh starts that Dragonflight has been all about since day one. I've been saying for a while now that whatever problems the community may have with Dragonflight's story, and they do, and fair enough. I think when the time comes to look back on the expansion, it will broadly be seen as the one where Blizzard really got their shit together, took up a brilliant philosophy gameplay-wise, introduced Dragonriding, and narratively went some way to setting up various troubled in-game populations on the road to stability and security. The Dragonflights are together and happy and include loads of different types of dragons. The Night Elves have a new home. Yeah, I know, we'll talk about it, but they do have a new home. The Forsaken have their gaff back, and now the Worgen have their home back too. The Orcs have a new level of belonging on Azeroth after their Heritage Armor questline. Horde and Alliance are basically at peace. Dragonflight has done a lot of tidying up, which was needed and which will only benefit the upcoming World Soul Saga. Question: will Gilneas be the same Gilneas that we're used to, so essentially one street, or will they expand it and remake it in some way? Seems like a lot for a mid-patch story questline thing, but hey, Dragonflight keeps on surprising me, so who knows? And okay, yeah, so mid-patch story content is indeed exactly the kind of thing we would have been expecting from 10.25, but I think most of us would have been thinking something more along the lines of the Dragonflight epilogues that are also promised, even though 10.2's post-raid questlines, in my opinion, are already absolute bangers in terms of epilogue. Honestly, they are really good. But yeah, I guess we've got Malfurion to come back, we've got a whole new Night Elf city to build, and even though you can't get into Amirdrassil on the PTR without getting instantly teleported out, a bit of sneaky shaman farsight reveals that building is well underway, with beautiful new high-res elf buildings and a new dock all being in place already by next patch. So, another really fun surprise. I know everyone is incredibly interested in the Azerothian archives too. The community has done that thing that the community sometimes does of just deciding that it's either a cool way of watching past cinematics or cutscenes, or the return of archaeology, or the absolute #1 most requested feature by me in the whole of the entire history of the game by me, a library tab in your collections that copies and stores every book you pick up and read in the game. I don't think it's any of those things. I feel like this is going to be one of those fun, better than an events that Dragonflight has done before, like the Vaults on Exile's Reach, or Time Rifts, or Secrets of Azeroth, and probably more like those first two, a repeatable little variable scenario thing with a vendor load of stuff to collect and some tasty lore tidbits and pleasant characters along the way. And if that is what Azerothian Archives is, then that'll be great, honestly. And yes, I have edged you enough. It is time to talk about the actual most exciting feature revealed for Seals of Renewal, which has already sparked huge excitement and discourse across the player base. The feature that I knew I had to hotfoot it to the PTR to test the second I heard of it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk Troll and Draenei customizations. Well, so far Trolls have 5 new hair colors, which I think gives them like 9 hair colors total or something, and Draenei have that cool dark skin color that was originally going to be part of the 10.17 Minari customizations, but wasn't, and so now we're getting it next patch instead. Was there anything else? Oh yes, follower dungeons. Okay, so this is the real meat and potatoes. Sorry Draenei, sorry Trolls, your hair is cool. The option to queue for Dragonflight's 8 normal dungeons solo or in groups of up to 4, and have the remaining party slots filled by computer-controlled tanks, healers, or DPS, depending on what you need to fill your composition. This is the feature that is a complete game changer. This is the feature that elevates this patch even more than Gilneas to levels of surprisingly big, surprisingly important. This is the thing that I simply had to test straight away, and so onto the PTR I went with my stream, even though obviously I didn't need my stream because, you know, follower dungeons. So I queued as a healer, and my group was filled out by characters that you will recognize from Exile's Reach, tanked by Captain Garrick, and with DPS from a hunter, mage, and elemental shaman. So all ranged, which I thought was a bit of an odd choice. Once I was in the dungeon, which was obviously an insta-queue, the mage summoned a table and told us to stock up, and there was a toggleable button to switch between everyone following me or the tank leading the way, which I clicked on, and Garrick did just that. Making the tank a paladin was a really good choice because Crusader's shield makes it incredibly obvious what she's pulling and when, and she did it a pack at a time, often pulling and then running back a bit to give us all time to get into position. The deeps weren't exactly ballers, but they were good enough, and even had a fairly good understanding of mechanics when they needed to. I mean, it's normal, so there's no interrupts or CC required. Mechanics tend to be at the level of don't stand in the glowing red swirly, and most of the time they don't, but some of the time they do, which is good because I am the healer, right? I want something to do. Garrick went through the dungeon at a pretty decent pace too, as long as I kept up. If she was about to run out of healing range, she would stop and wait. And actually after a boss fight when I needed mana, she stopped completely and told me that she was waiting for me to get it back. You know, she even used mitigation and self-heals when she needed to, and at the end of the dungeon, she told me that I did a great job. Basically what I'm saying is Captain Garrick is politer than 99% of players that I've ever pugged a dungeon with. I feel like we could all learn something from Captain Garrick. At one point, I decided to change spec to see what would happen, so I switched from Disc to Shadow, and one of the DPS in the group disappeared and was replaced by a druid who took on healing duties. So this new system already works absolutely brilliantly. The only slight issues I came across was in the Noku defensive dungeon, and that's why I specifically tested that, where your gang are not all that keen on dragon riding, and will disappear when you take off, appear next to you again a couple of seconds after you land. So unless you want the dungeon to last a really long time by doing the whole thing on foot or using the flight paths, did you know there are flight paths in Noku Defensive? There are flight paths in Noku Defensive, always have been. I just learned this thanks to the follower dungeon. Then you are probably going to be leading the way on that one. But otherwise, it all works great and is absolutely perfect for what it's meant to be, which is a way for players to practice new roles like healing, tanking, or unfamiliar DPS specs, away from the pressures and responsibilities of other players who know the dungeon like they don't, and B, I think what it's really meant for, a way for new players to go through Dragonflight dungeons at their own pace when they're leveling through the Dragon Isles as a new player experience next expansion, when no other players are queuing these dungeons. It basically turns these dungeons into a story experience, essentially just a really good scenario. And that means that from now on, dungeons can be included as a mandatory part of the questing and narrative experience again, because there's literally no reason why everyone can't do them. And I think that both of those reasons are absolutely brilliant. Now, to a worry that I know many of you have, and which I will treat seriously, does this mean that players will do follower dungeons instead of group content? Will players take the route of least resistance, as they tend to do, and withdraw from the social side of WoW when it comes to dungeons and turn the game into a single player experience? Will this damage the communal fabric that World of Warcraft is built on and requires to survive? I know these are genuine concerns, and so I have genuinely given them a lot of thought, but in my opinion, no. In fact, quite the opposite. Firstly, there's that point about follower dungeons facilitating dungeons being a required part of the questing experience in a way that they can't be currently, especially for older content, which Dragonflight will soon be. Currently, for a new player playing by themselves, which is what the majority of new players do at first, dungeons are just not part of the leveling experience. Because new players don't have to do them, they're not especially encouraged to do them, the queues aren't short for past expansion dungeons, and obviously if they do enter one, their group blasts through everything in double quick time, leaving them behind, and by the end they didn't really learn anything, they didn't get better at the game, and they didn't even really see much of the dungeon at all. It's just not a great experience. Follower dungeons means that now those dungeon quests that are currently optional at the end of the zone arc and which literally tie up the story of the zone, those can now be shield quests, part of the story that new players enter naturally, muddle through in their own time, and even pick up the rudimentary concepts of tanking and healing by watching the NPCs doing it. It basically normalizes the concept of dungeons to new players, makes it part of their normal gameplay, and I think makes it more likely that they will step into harder group versions of that content when the time comes. For me personally, it's exciting purely from a narrative point of view because it's one step closer to my Path of the Curator leveling idea, which is when players choose an expansion to level through in Chromie time, they can play through the whole full curated storyline of that expansion, including relevant dungeons and raid bosses, and complete the story of that expansion before they move on, instead of like now, where you complete the first couple of zones of the expansion you choose and then get ported out when you hit 60. And what about existing players? Will they stop queuing for dungeons with other players and just run follower dungeons from now on? I don't see why that would happen. Like, why is someone going to be running normal dungeons anyway? It's not for loot. You can get better from any of the open world content in Dragonflight. No, most of us, if we're running normal dungeons at all, it's for leveling an ult, and no one who currently does that is going to drop out of queuing to level through follower dungeons, because they're naturally just much slower and less efficient for XP than queuing and running with IRL players. But follower dungeons are a great place to try healing or tanking in a safe environment, a place where you can just stop and sort out your bars or UI or add-ons. You can fail without catching shit from an impatient group of strangers, because Captain Garrick is not giving you any shit, I promise. She is wise and kind and basically the Chad tank. She is the GOAT tank. And so I think that far from emptying the normal dungeon queues of players, it's actually only going to mean a whole bunch of people entering group dungeons exactly because they have had the chance to practice with the follower version and built their confidence that way. Like, raiding these days is my favorite thing about the game, has been for nearly 10 years, but I would never have had the courage to get into it, especially as a healer, if I hadn't been able to do LFR first. So as a way of running normal dungeons, I think it can only be a huge net positive to the game. 11 out of 10, I love it. The only change I'd make right now is to have one of the 3 DPS NPCs be a melee, just because it would make a more rounded group and learning experience. And just for fun, because I like shit like this, have more banter between the team as they run the dungeon. It's not a deal breaker, obviously, it's just cool. And of course, the future I think everyone imagines is one where eventually, as the War Within gets rolled out, the group isn't populated by NPCs from Exile's Reach at all, but by members of your war band, your own alts running dungeons with you. Now, obviously, this is the kind of idea that makes you go, and I love it, but there are obvious problems if you kind of think about it just for a second. Like, okay, so yeah, right now, Beast Mastery Hunter, Prop Paladin, Resto Shaman, Fire Mage, and Elemental Shaman are scripted into each dungeon. So let's say if you have alts that are one of those classes, they can slot in instead of the standard NPCs. Do they have their actual gear and item level, or are they standardized to the levels that the existing NPCs have? Can they get loot and gear from this dungeon run? Because that feels kind of broken and against the spirit of the game. They are being computer controlled when they get that loot, after all. Likewise with XP, can I level multiple alts to the same dungeon even though I'm not actually playing them? Something just doesn't seem right about that to me, which means that I feel like the only reason to have your warband alts in your dungeon group would be for cool novelty. A cool novelty that I would love, don't get me wrong, but if you think about it, the only time anyone would ever really see it is if they're leveling an alt through follower dungeons, which isn't very efficient anyway. Basically no one would ever see it. I know, yeah, I totally pissed on the parade there, didn't I? But I still think that one time I ever did a dungeon with my alts filling the other roles would be very cool. Totally worth the tens of thousands of developer hours it would take to make happen. And I'm not even joking, okay? Totally worth. So, in summary, follower dungeons are brilliant and a huge feature, which honestly, it's kind of weird that Blizzard didn't mention at BlizzCon, to the extent where, honestly, it kind of makes me wonder what else they didn't mention. You might think I'm being dramatic and overly conspiratorial by saying that, and fair enough, but I just want to point out that I also wrote that exact same thing on Twitter, and no less than 9 prominent WoW devs, including beautifully jacketed Big Boss Holly Lonsdale herself, replied to that tweet with suspicious-looking emojis and GIFs suggesting pretty strongly that there absolutely is at least one more massive feature coming in a future Dragonflight patch that they indeed have not mentioned yet. And you know, what the f is it? I mean, it's got to be something good, right? Clearly something on the level of follower dungeons, which is a huge feature. So what is it? When is it? And more importantly, will it tick another square on my bingo card? Who knows? But in the meantime, let's make some complete guesses because, you know, that's fun. I genuinely think, judging by these responses, that there could be as much as another dungeon or mini raid, or certainly like group instance coming in Dragonflight. We know Amirdrassil is the final raid tier, but the post-raid quests strongly hint that Deadeye, the null boss of Dragonflight's best dungeon, will be making a return to attack the tree with all their rot powers. I genuinely think it could be something as big as a new dungeon, which would be especially awesome if it found its way into the Fated Season Mythic Plus rotation. But then it could be anything. It's probably stuff we haven't even thought of. Or it could be, look, I've said this on stream and it is kind of wild, but I'm going to say it now because, yeah, I'm going to make it official. I think it's player housing. I know that is the dumbest thing you have ever heard. A box feature for a new expansion. Something that would be one of the biggest and most significant additions to the game ever, and they're not going to mention it at BlizzCon and just drop it in a bullshit 0.7 patch or something. I don't really believe it myself, or at least I shouldn't believe it, and yet, I don't know. I've just got this feeling, maybe not the whole system, but like a little taster of what's to come. Maybe we will get a little apartment in Gilneas, or Amirdrassil, the new city being built under the New World Tree, which already has its own separate phase, would seem to me, and my stupid not a dev, don't really understand how anything works brain, to be an obvious place to have a first player housing location, right? I am almost certainly wrong, to the extent that this is a prediction that I can't really lose. If I am wrong, it's like, well, yeah, of course he was wrong. It was a very silly suggestion. While if I'm right, I look like an absolute genius. I get that. But nevertheless, that is my prediction. Player housing, secret feature, coming soon. Clip it, print it, see you soon. Evie, you don't know this because you weren't here for the filming of the section, but I just did a strange thing.
What did you do?
I did a naughty thing.
Oh?
I did a bad thing.
Tell me more.
I predicted that player housing was coming like in before within. I
knew you would.
I did it.
Have you seen
I did the prediction.
That tweet thread? Have you seen those reactions?
It's literally what I was just talking about.
I mean, it's the evidence is irrefutable.
Kind of wild.
Either that or we are getting so pranked. Either they had literally a meeting and were like, let's cause as much like psychic damage to like one person in the world and
let's make that person Taliesin.
Yeah. I feel like he really deserves it.
He just deserves to be hurt.
Yeah.
Well, look, if developers acting sus is evidence of player housing, then that it is like that.
That's what's happening. I would like to believe. I would love to believe.
I believe. I'm putting X's on all my windows. But that's not what I wanted to talk about today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, so, I haven't talked about 10.2 at all on the weekly reset at all because of all the 10.2.5 stuff.
Of course.
And there's loads to talk about. There's the cinematics, which we spoke about in our new podcast last week. If you haven't watched the It's a WoW podcast, obviously.
That is the name of the podcast.
A WoW podcast, obviously, is what we've called it.
Yeah.
And every Wednesday or Thursday, probably Thursday.
It's going to be Thursday.
Live on the channel, and you can watch the recordings in the podcast section of this very channel right here. And also you can get it on all your podcasting platforms and things as well. Highly recommended.
Yes.
We will be doing it every week, and we'll be getting guests in. It'll be great.
1 p.m. UK time, London time on Thursdays.
Yes,
can't wait.
It's basically like an hour and a half long version of this bit.
Exactly. Someone commented and was like, an extended edition sofa section.
Yeah,
and
so
I was like, basically.
Other things I want to talk about regarding 10.2 though, there is the post cinematic quest lines. So when you completed the raid, there is a whole other series of quests to do, which aren't the epilogue quests, because those are coming in 10.25. They're just like so I'm calling them the post-raid quests. Now, Evie, have you done the post-raid quests?
No, I haven't, because I haven't finished the raid. How am I supposed to finish the raid? I did everything I can do on LFR. I tried pugging like a normal, and everyone was like, link achieve. And I was like, what?
What achieve?
Exactly. Like, what are you? And I feel like people just say that for memes now. Anyway.
Yeah, seriously.
But yeah, so hopefully I'll be jumping on some like guild normal runs, and we'll get them down in no time, and I won't have to wait until he drops on LFR.
Well, the good news is that means I don't have to put up a red spoiler bot.
No.
Because I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens in these quests.
Okay,
but
okay.
I will tell you the upshot of it. So if you have no idea about what happens to the world tree after the raid, and if you don't want to know, then, I don't know, turn off now. We'll see you next week. See you for the podcast.
See you there.
But I have completed the raid because, do you remember last tier when the raid was like super easy?
You just
and
blasted
some people are
through
pretty
it.
happy about that, but I feel like for heroic guilds like us, it's not that great. We want heroic to be a challenge for us and to last like 2 or 3 months, really. And I mean, we got it down really quickly in 10.1. And what that means is you just have like this extended raid break where you're not being social as you would be with your guild. There's not as much reason to do Mythic Plus and stuff because you're not working towards completing a raid. And that's a big reason why I do Mythic Plus is I want to make sure I'm as prepared for the raid as possible. But if we've done the raid to the level that we want to do it, so I'm always a fan of heroic being really challenging.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like this raid's going to be either. Really.
No.
We blew through normal in one night,
Yeah.
which I shouldn't really be able
This
to do.
is
We're
also
not that good.
exactly, and this is why it sucks for me as well. Even if I'm not doing heroic, I'm just doing like normals and stuff. By the time I can log on, everyone has finished the raid in 2 hours.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
totally.
It's like I'll join you after I put the baby to bed, and it's like, oh, you're done.
Yeah,
Okay, literally, you have just completed the raid.
I'm sure we can find a way around that.
No, I know.
You only need to be in there for Firak really to
but
open up the final quests. But so we have completed it. We're hoping that heroic is going to be a bit harder. We are on the 4th boss of heroic at the moment. We've gotten down to 3%. This time, if we complete the raid in like 3 weeks or whatever, what that means is, we haven't got another raid until next expansion because there's fated seasons, but that's not the same.
No,
we will do some
count.
fated, but it's not the same as progression.
No.
And it means essentially we won't be hanging out in a progression setting for another year, pretty much. And that does kind of suck.
I feel like maybe you've spoken too soon, and the bosses are going to get like
Farak is just
exponentially
gonna
harder.
Absolutely destroy us.
Each
But
next boss.
what it does mean is, like, on the plus side, that means I have seen all of the post-raid quests as well. And what I will tell you about those is something that I think everyone already knows. Amirdrassil does bloom. That's part of the quests before the raid as well. And it has now appeared in the Anaran Plains. So once you've completed the raid, the world tree and that whole kind of zone, basically, the Emerald Dream zone, appears in the Anaran Plains. You can still go through the portal and get to the Emerald Dream version of it. And the tree is obviously there as well. And everything's phased with all the dailies and stuff.
Sure.
But in that huge gap, just like we predicted in a video when the alpha hit of Dragonflight, that is indeed where the latest, where Amirdrassil has appeared, where the new world tree is. And there are some quests that happen around there. The quests are great, actually. There's a big party that happens where you talk to basically every character that you've met throughout the expansion.
I love a big party.
I love that stuff.
I love a big
so make sure
party.
you do talk to everyone there. There's Jaina and Thrall are there.
Cool.
And there's a little hint at next expansion where they talk about hearing a voice.
Really?
Which is really, really cool.
So
there's all that. But the main upshot of it is that Amirdrassil has appeared. They are building their home there. Like I mentioned in the scripted bit, they are building buildings and stuff there on the PTR.
Have like all the refugees, have all like the
they will
old
be moving
night elves
in,
moving in.
Yeah, exactly. And the wisps are there. They didn't have to sacrifice themselves to like save the tree or whatever.
Goodness.
There's a really lovely bit in the party with Della and Summermoon. Stay a while and listen, which I won't spoil.
No, because I want to play through that. Yeah.
The upshot is that the world tree is in the Dragon Isles, much as I think most people thought it was going to be, but there is discourse about this because, of course, a lot of Night Elf players wanted the tree, and it was very important to them that the tree was going to be in Kalimdor. Now, are you aware of this discussion?
I am aware of this
as
a Night Elf player.
This is why I wanted to ask you your opinion on it, really. So what's your take on this?
I mean, I totally get it because, right, the idea is that the Night Elves like fought and died, for like Darkshore and for that whole area, and we're like, just let us have this, and now it's just not even close. And so I get why people are upset that it's not in Kalimdor. I mean, personally, I think I'll get used to it. But and then again, I'm not an RPer, and so I haven't spent like huge amounts of time in like Darnassus. Gilneas back when it was around and things like that. But I get people's kind of frustrations about it because night elves, I feel like, have been kind of canonically like brutalized,
especially over the last few years.
Yeah, over the last few expansions, and like I was even kind of shocked playing through some of the quests, like in the most recent patch was just like fields of dead night elves and things, and it's like, oh, actually, we deserve something nice.
Yeah.
What do you think about all this?
So I'm of the opinion overall that the new World Tree should be in Kalimdor, but the reasons for that opinion are just because I think it would make more people happy. And no, seriously, and I think that's a good enough reason, right? So I think that more people and more people who care the most would be happier if it was in Kalimdor, so for that reason I think it should be in Kalimdor, because I think it would be better for like the player base and for the game, because it's what more people want, and it's like really, really important to a lot of people. So but I my first ever character in WoW was a night elf. Like I've got like active night elf characters now. I always really enjoy playing night elf, so I do care. It's not like I'm on the outside of it. And I've always thought that the Dragon Isles would be a nice place to have it, so I don't mind. And actually, since the party and since the post-raid quests, I'm completely sold on it, and I'm like, this is a great place for the World Tree. Okay. It's really, really nice. But the thing is, people that are upset that it's not in Kalimdor, they won't ever see those quests, because they're just going to be like, they're not playing the game, they're upset with it, and when the tree isn't in Kalimdor, they're going to be like, well, see? The writers don't understand, it's rubbish, and they don't see everything else. They don't see the quests, they don't see the conversations, they don't have the ambiance of it. And so it's kind of pointless for those players, because they're never going to see it. And I'm not blaming them, by the way. I'm sympathetic to their argument that the idea is that it kind of means that the Horde won and were successful in their displaced population. There's, I think, a pretty good counter argument to that, which I do ascribe to as well. This idea that you displaced a population, but from somewhere where they had only lived for a decade, like their actual home, like their actual ancestral home is Amirdrassil and Hijal, and that's where they actually settled after the Sundering, and that's where they actually were looking after and stuff like that, and they still hold that. That got destroyed in Warcraft 3 through them on purpose to stop Archimonde, but they still have a presence there. They have not been wiped off the face of Kalimdor, and actually they are still in control of their spiritual home. Which I think is a good argument, but that's I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to lessen the argument from people that think it should, the new World Tree should be in Canada. I am very sympathetic.
And hopefully people do play through those quests that give it a little bit more like context and flavor. I mean, personally, like if you're gonna put it in the Dragon Isles, like Onaran Plains is my least favorite part of it. So I just I rarely get out there, and it's really nice. It's great, like no shade to it, but it feels like physically kind of weird, to be like going there as a night elf. It doesn't quite make sense to me yet.
So I think a lot will depend on the portal situation there, and what else is in there. And bear in mind that Dragonflight is going to become the new player experience once the War Within launches. So new players, they'll do Exile's Reach, and then they will be put through Dragonflight. So it will still be relevant in that sense, is like where everyone goes. I've got a feeling they will probably try and keep it as a relevant sort of place all the way through the War Within as well, just to kind of like really solidify it, right? I think there might be some player housing there as well, but that's a whole different thing. That's a whole different thing.
Okay, hold on, that changes the game for me.
Well, anyway, I guess there'll be plenty for us to talk about in the podcast this week.
There will be.
With 10.2.5, and I'm sure there will be
mining.
Data. Oh, we've got a whole ton of stuff we haven't whole ton of data mine stuff that we did not have time to look at in this episode, because we were just talking about like the actual features and stuff. I feel like probably the podcast would be a good place to do that.
I think it would.
Fantastic. Well, we will see you there, and thank you for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all of our work happen. Patrons, thank you. Without you, there'd be just no Taliesin and Evitel.
There would be nothing. Quick shout out to our Instagram account, which is now real and live, go follow us on Instagram, please. Excuse me, Tally. Excuse me. Why is he like this? Can you please, just out of spite, like for Tally, because I think he sees this as some failed endeavor. We're having breakfast this morning. It's like, what are you gonna do? And he's like, you're gonna post on the Instagram account, babe.
I just listen. The reason I find it, the reason
I write an Instagram post.
I love how into it you are. I'm not mocking it. I just find it glorious. Like we have already sold the Instagram on this channel more than we've ever sold the Patreon.
Yeah.
Can I sell the Patreon? We've never done it really before.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Patreon. You can get everything on the Patreon for $1. You can give more if you want. Lots of people do, thankfully. Thanks for that.
True.
But you get everything, including like hundreds of hours of videos at this point.
Yeah.
Hour-long Q&As and behind-the-scene videos and things like that.
Hundreds of hours.
And you know, like priority tickets to like the Weekly Reset Live and things like that. So which are always free anyway. So yeah. So stuff like that. If you fancy it, if you fancy helping this channel happen more, that would be really good. The more money we get, the more videos we can make. Yay! But thank you guys. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. And remember, my name is Holly Lonsdale, and every other dev that posted like a little winky emoji or GIF or something.
Yeah, or like a little on
that thread. You evil puppeteers. From me, Taliesin.
And me, Evitel.
Cheerio.